something new.
Eat Well for Less starts tonight at 8 on BBC One.
A change to the schedule now. You'll find The Wanted and then Bargain Hunt over on BBC Two. Here, Andrew Neil and Joe Coburn bring us the Daily Politics.
It's 26 years since Britain's first female Prime Minister left office. Today, the country's second woman Prime Minister begins her tenure, and her task is no less daunting than Thatcher's: to heal the divisions in her party and to chart the future of Britain outside the European Union. Morning, folks. Welcome to the Daily Politics here on BBC One. So we say farewell to Prime Minister Cameron. Hello, Prime Minister May. Theresa May will enter Downing Street early this evening as Prime Minister. She's promised a bold, positive vision for a country that works not just for the privileged few. But what does that mean? What will it look like? David Cameron left Downing Street earlier this morning to head over to the House of Commons for his final Prime Minister's questions. We'll bring you all the action live at midday. Jeremy Corbyn will automatically be on the ballot for the Labour leadership contest. Meanwhile, a new contender, Owen Smith, says he will also challenge Mr Corbyn.
And I'm in Central Lobby in the Houses of Parliament, where I'll be getting reaction from all the key political players.
So all that's in the next hour and a half. And this historic occasion here in Westminster, we're joined by the current Northern Ireland Secretary, Theresa Villiers, and the Shadow Justice Secretary, Richard Bergen. Welcome to you both.
Hi.
Now, a sunny morning, as you can see here in Westminster. The Prime Minister left Downing Street a little while ago for his final visit to the Commons as Prime Minister for Prime Minister's Questions. As I say, that's coming live at noon. Mr Cameron was the youngest Prime Minister for 198 years. He leaves office still under the age of 50. He's been replaced by an older woman. Mrs May is 59. She's ruled out a snap election, and until we learn otherwise, we will take her at her word. It's probably the last thing Labour would want at this moment anyway. So, we expect the Prime Minister, when he's finished with PMQs and said his goodbyes in the Commons, will then go back to Downing Street and leave for the Palace around 5 o'clock tonight. And when he gets to the Palace, he informs the Queen of his formal resignation. He then leaves. He is no longer Prime Minister. Shortly after that, Theresa May will be taken to the Palace to do the traditional kissing of hands. I'm not sure the hands are actually kissed, but it's a symbolic signal that this is the new Prime Minister. And when she leaves Buckingham Palace to head to Downing Street, she will be the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And she'll go back to Downing Street, and we expect her there to say a few words before she goes through that famous door. So a busy and historic day here in Westminster. Lots to cover. BBC News Channel, BBC One will keep you up to date throughout the day. And of course, Joe Coburn is in the central lobby in this big building behind me, and she's going to be doing a number of interviews all day. So let's now go over to Jo Co and hear what she's going to say and who she's going to be talking to. Jo.
Yes, Andrew, it's a momentous occasion here, as you've said, in Westminster. It's even more packed here in Central Lobby than it normally is for Prime Minister's Questions, of course, because it's David Cameron's final session here. Let's try and get a sense of the occasion with the International Development Secretary, Justin Greening, who's joined me. Your thoughts?
Well, it is historic, and obviously it's the end of the Cameron era. He does his final PMQs. I think he's always been very good at PMQs, so it'd be interesting to see how he handles today's last session. And I think he could be really proud of what he's achieved as Prime Minister for our country, I think, turning the country around from the brink of bankruptcy, all sorts of work around opportunities for young people on apprenticeships, more women in the workplace than ever before. But I think, yes, a real sense of actually what's ahead of us now, and a day when Theresa May will walk into number 10.
Right, changing of the guard, as you say. Let's look ahead to Theresa May. Will her government be radically different in style and substance to David Cameron's?
I think what you'll see is a combination of delivering the manifesto that we were only elected to do last year. So keeping that and making sure we get on with it. But then, yes, I think she'll bring her own style and some of her real priorities, if you like, to this government as well.
What are those?
Well, for someone like myself, coming from a very ordinary background in Rotherham in the 80s, it's around making sure that wherever you start in Britain, you can get right to the top, you can fulfil your potential. And I think also when you look at some of the other areas she's focused on in Home Office, whether it's tackling FGM, ending forced marriage, domestic violence, Theresa's always been someone who's been a very tough Home Secretary, but when she sees things that are injustices that she doesn't accept, she will also set out to change them.
So will her government at the top table reflect those priorities with people like you sitting around that cabinet table?
Well, we'll see what choices she makes on the team she's going to build, but I certainly hope it'll show a lot of the great women that we've got in our party.
50% cabinet, do you think? Should it be?
I think she's going to pull through more women. I think it's up to Theresa what team she wants at the end of the day, but I hope there are lots of the great women here. People like Karen Bradley have been fantastic in Home Office. Even people more out of sight like the Deputy Chief Whip, Anne Milton. They're just great colleagues to work with, and I think have a real role to play in this next set of these coming years for the Conservative Party in government.
Justine Greening, I'm going to let you take your place inside the chamber. Enjoy the last session here of David Cameron. And of course, Andrew, as you said, you'll be returning to Central Lobby and I'll be talking to more of the key players.
Thanks, Joko. They'll all be rushing to get their places for a very busy PMQs. There's never enough room for all of them if they turn up, these MPs. Two that don't have to worry. They've got a ringside seat here on BBC One. Theresa Villiers, in what way will the May government be different in policy from the Cameron government?
Well, I think Theresa will map out her programme. I think there will be a lot of consistency because Theresa, like David Cameron, is driven by the need to improve life chances, the sorts of things that Justine was talking about, to make sure that we do all we can to back aspiration, to ensure that everyone has the potential everyone can fulfil their potential.
But that's political rhetoric. Every politician I've ever heard talks about life chances and fulfilling aspiration. Nobody's against that. How will the government differ? How will the May government be different?
Well, she's obviously going to focus on the big challenges we have of building more homes for people to buy and rent, ensuring that we continue with our reform of the welfare system so that it backs those who work, ensuring that we do everything to create the best education system in the world.
How is any of that different from what the Cameron government says it was trying to do? It's been trying to build more homes, not very successfully. It's been trying to improve the education system. People can make up their minds on that. Where is the difference? Or is it just a continuity government?
Well, there's consistency, but also the opportunities Theresa has as Prime Minister relate to our decision to leave the European Union. There is huge potential in a Brexit vote in terms of new trade deals with countries around the world. That is a whole range of opportunities which were not open to David Cameron's government, and I'm sure Theresa will seize them with enthusiasm.
All right. Richard Bergen, are you apprehensive about Theresa May as Prime Minister? Will she be, when your party sorts itself out, will she be a formidable adversary as PM?
Well, I think the real challenge for Theresa May, and quite rightly, people are celebrating the fact that we have our second female Prime Minister. But I think the real challenge for Theresa May is to pursue policies which don't disproportionately, adversely affect women, because the austerity and cuts agenda that the government has pursued has disproportionately hit women. But the truth is that Theresa May doesn't have an easy job. She's inheriting an economy that isn't in the good position that George Osborne would have wished it to be. So it's not going to be an easy ride for Theresa May. No, maybe not an easy ride, but is Labour apprehensive about it? She'll have a fresh start. She'll, for at least a while, have a honeymoon with the party. She may even have a honeymoon with the country. She'll be in quite a strong position compared to Labour, will she not? I think the task for Labour is to unite, face outwards and look forward towards putting a positive Labour case to the country, rather than worrying about the Conservative party itself. Well, you probably won't be able to do that before September the 24th, but we'll come back to that in a minute. Because while the Tories look to unite around the new leader, the Labour Party is in turmoil.
Last night, the party's ruling executive narrowly voted to put Jeremy Corbyn's name on the upcoming leadership ballot without having to be nominated. That's what he wanted. This has angered many Labour MPs who are against him, the vast majority of whom have been openly critical of his leadership. After the decision was reached by the National Executive Committee in a street just round the corner from here, this was Mr Corbyn's reaction.
I'm delighted to say the Labour Party National Executive has decided that an incumbent is automatically on the ballot paper, so I'm on the ballot paper. And we will be campaigning on all the things that matter. The inequality and poverty that exists in this country, the need to end the privatisation of our National Health Service, the need to give real hope and opportunity to young people all across this country. That's what Labour exists for. That's what we exist for.
Mr Corbyn, after getting his name on the ballot paper, of course that was sparked off by Angela Egan, who's already launched her challenge for the Labour Party's top job. And this morning, a second Labour MP threw his hat into the ring in the race to challenge Mr Corbyn. The former Shadow and Pension Secretary, Owen Smith, said he would be a radical and credible leader who would take Labour back into power.
Because I think the Labour Party is in grave peril right now. There is a danger that we are going to split. And if we were to split, that would be a disaster for working people, because the Labour Party has been the greatest vehicle for good for working people in this country for a century. And we cannot afford to allow it to fall by the wayside. And if I get to lead this party, we will be a credible but radical government in waiting. We will be a powerful opposition to a Tory government that has not left Britain stronger, but has left Britain weaker in oh so many ways.
So Owen Smith, one of two to challenge Jeremy Corbyn for the Labour leadership, though I learned this morning there may be moves to whittle the challengers down to one. We'll see if that happens in the days ahead. Richard Bergen, this is going to be a pretty nasty personal leadership election, isn't it?
Well, it shouldn't be, and I hope it's not.
But it's going to be.
Well, what I'd like to start off by saying is I'm really glad that the undemocratic attempt to deny Labour Party members the length and breadth of the country of their fair and just right to choose whichever leader they want has failed, so I'm delighted about that. Right. But as the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has said, this can't be nasty, it can't be divisive, and it can't be personal. Let's concentrate on the issues.
Right, well, let's look at what happened at a Corbyn rally in Kentish Town near North London, central London, last night. This is John MacDonald, the Shadow Treasury Chancellor.
They've been plotting and conniving. The only good thing about it, as plotters, they're useless.
So, John MacDonald, number two in your party, calling Labour MPs conniving and plotting and, not to use the full expletive, effing useless. What bit is the kinder, gentler politics about that?
Well, it was some sort of comedy rally last night, and the test before Labour is not whether or not John MacDonald's jokes are good or whether John MacDonald's a good comedian. It's about the kind of anti-austerity positive agenda we can put forward. But what I would say more generally, Andrew, it's time for all Labour MPs to calm down, take a deep breath, stop infighting, support whoever you wish, obviously, in the leadership campaign hard for them, and then focus on the task of the Labour Party, which is to hold this Conservative government to account and take the fight to the Tories.
It wasn't just John MacDonald last night, whether he's a comedian or the Shadow Chancellor, I'll leave to our viewers. Mr Sirwatka, leader of PCS, also backing Corbyn, one of the unions behind him, he said Tony Blair should, quote, F off. Or F you, he actually said, not using the full expletive again. He said Neil Kinnock, a former leader of your party, was, quote, a disgrace to Wales. He should pee off. The CWU boss of the union, David Ward, said some Labour MPs, your colleagues, are, quote, bloody Tories who should join the May cabinet. I ask again, what happened to the kinder, gentler politics, or are they all comedians?
Well, I don't think that any Labour MP should leave the Labour Party or leave the Parliamentary Labour Party. I don't think that we should be in any way suggesting that a split in the Parliamentary Labour Party or in the country is a good idea. But let me say this. If the National Executive Committee last night had voted to deny the fair and just chance for Labour members across the country to vote for the leader they want, then I think the Labour Party would have split. And that would have been bad news for everyone in the Labour Party.
Is it not a sign of how rancorous this campaign is expected to be that local party constituency organisations have been told not to have meetings?
Well, I think the Labour Party has always been, and should always be, a coalition of socialists and social democrats.
Why are you not having meetings?
Why
can you not have meetings?
Decisions. Well, the NEC thinks the Labour Party has got enough on its plate over the summer.
It's worried.
It's worried.
It's worried about how bad it's going to be.
Incidentally, many constituent Labour parties don't have meetings in August in any event, mine included.
Yeah, but they also don't often have leadership campaigns, though they are now going to have 2 in a row in August. Let me ask you this. If you joined the Labour Party last year, many to vote for Mr. Corbyn, do you get to vote this year, or are you hit by the cut-off date of January this year?
Well, if you joined as a full member last year, before January this year, then you're entitled to vote in this
And what
election.
about the £3 sign-ups?
Well, my understanding is that the National Executive Committee decided that the £3 supporters who joined last year, if they didn't join as full members, would have to re-register as supporters in a 48-hour window starting this Thursday and have to pay the sum of £25.
And I assume Mr. Corbyn and his campaign will be organising that, will they not?
Well, what I would say is I want this election process to be as open, inclusive and participatory as possible, and I don't want to see Labour supporters priced out of having their say. So the £25 does disturb me somewhat.
But if you signed up to join the Labour Party, we're told 130,000 have joined since the referendum, and I think they paid £40. They were not on the £3 list. They're now being told they can't vote unless they pay another £25. But in the small print, it said they could vote in a leadership election. Are you not going back on that?
And it wasn't the small print, Andrew, it was the big print.
Well,
on the Labour
you
Party,
made my point for
on
me.
the Labour Party website, it said if you join, you'll be able to vote. I know that Angela Eagle, Neil Kinnock and others were encouraging people to join, quite rightly.
But they won't be able to vote now.
Process. That disturbs me greatly, and I'd like to see that looked at again. I am not afraid, and we're not afraid of more people involved. We're not afraid of ideas or debate. So let's make it as inclusive and participatory as possible.
Do you detect that there is still massive support for Mr. Corbyn among the rank and file members of the party?
I do, but I don't take any election, either an election in the country or an election in the Labour Party, for granted. So what Jeremy and his team have got to do is put out a positive agenda for what a Labour government will do and how we'll get a Labour government.
Labour's in turmoil. It's maybe going to the courts over the membership and who can vote. The campaign goes all the way through till the new leader is announced on the 24th. We don't know what will happen there. It could still split. Could be some kind of schism. Why don't you call an election?
We believe that we need stability at this important time. We've got a mandate for a 5-year term. I think it's absolutely right that we fulfil that mandate, we carry on until the election date that's been set, and we make a success of leaving the European Union during that period.
All right, so no election. You heard it here. We'll hold that against you if you change your mind. 12 minutes to 12. I'm just looking at my watch to check the time. 12 minutes till Prime Minister's questions and Mr. Cameron's final one. Let's go back to the Commons and to Joko in the central lobby.
Thank you, Andrew. Yes, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the Labour leadership contest because with me here in Central Lobby is Stephen Kinnock. He was amongst the first of the Parliamentary Labour Party to call for Jeremy Corbyn to step down and resign. But every attempt you and your colleagues have made to actually prevent Jeremy Corbyn being on the ballot for the next leadership contest has failed.
Well, it was a decision of the NEC. I personally don't understand the logic of the decision, but it is what it is. We've now got to move forward. We have a leadership contest. We're now battling for the soul of the Labour Party. I genuinely believe it's a battle that we're going to win.
Is the party going to split, though?
There is only one Labour Party, and we will continue as a Labour Party. Angela Eagle has got what it takes to win this contest. She's got the experience. She is the kind of person that we need to steady the ship now. And also, she's a persuader and not a protester. The Brexit vote has completely changed the face of British politics. Angela's got the skills and the experience to carry out the negotiations that we need, not just to wave a placard in a corridor somewhere.
Right. So you see John McDonnell, Jeremy Corbyn and their supporters as a sort of protest movement, not the real Labour Party?
With all due respect to Jeremy and John, they've spent their entire political careers in rooms and at rallies where everybody agrees with them. This is a time for serious politics. We're in the middle of a national crisis. We need a serious politician to lead the Labour Party. That person is Angela Eagle.
But with all the evidence we have at the moment, Jeremy Corbyn will win another Labour leadership contest.
Well, I think if you look at people's mailbags at the moment, a lot of my colleagues as well are saying this, that many members who said, yeah, I voted for Jeremy last time, are realising that he's just not up to the job, failing to hold the Prime Minister to account at Prime Minister's questions, hopeless on the refugee crisis, hopeless in the referendum, and then coming out the morning after the referendum to say that we should trigger Article 50 immediately, as if he was asking Islington Council to change the streetlights on the road. It's just extraordinary, and it just shows, I think, how out of touch with reality he is.
But he still could win. If he does win a second leadership contest, will you and your colleagues shut up?
I will serve my constituents, the people that elected me, and I'll be very happy and honoured and proud to do that from the backbenches.
You wouldn't serve in a Jeremy Corbyn shadow cabinet?
I do not have confidence in Jeremy as a leader, and you cannot serve on the front bench unless you have confidence in the leader. What's clear is we don't have a front bench at the moment. We are not able to form a credible opposition. I really hope that our members who vote now over the coming weeks and months think about not just the future of our party, but the future of our democracy. If you can't form a front bench, you can't form an opposition.
You're supporting Angela Eagle. What do you say to Owen Smith, who is also now challenging for the leadership?
I genuinely hope that we will only have one candidate, and to campaign against Jeremy, and I really hope that candidate will be Angela Eagle. But of course, Owen is a very talented politician, brings a lot to the table. So let's see what happens over the coming days.
Stephen Kinnock, thank you very much. It's going to be a long, hot summer, Andrew, perhaps without the heat.
It's a long, hot programme out here, Joko. It's all right for you in air-conditioned splendour. We workers are struggling. You know it's important when there are helicopters above us here in Westminster, and there are helicopters above us today. Let's have a look at the shots from the helicopter with this glorious July day, with Westminster, the Houses of Parliament, the Palace of Westminster in all its glory. Very shortly, the Prime Minister will be going there for his final PMQs. The press is here in massive numbers again in College Green. I'm not quite sure if you can see us there. If we could, we'd wave at you. Tents everywhere, not just British media, but European media, American media. Once again, Westminster, the centre of media attention for these historic events. David Cameron's final PMQs. But before we do the build-up to that, let's just remind ourselves of his time in office, including some of those key parliamentary moments.
Prime Minister, do you now regret when once asked what your favourite joke was, you replied, Nick Clegg?
What happened on Bloody Sunday was both unjustified and unjustifiable. It was wrong. We simply cannot have a situation where a failed pariah state festers on Europe's southern border. Calm down, dear. Calm down. Calm down. Listen. What is on offer isn't in Britain's interests, so I didn't agree to it. I'm a marriage man, and the great thing about last night's vote is that two gay people who love each other will now be able to get married, and I think that's an important advance. It is clear to me that the British Parliament, reflecting the views of the British people, does not want to see British military action. I get that, and the government will act accordingly. I take full responsibility for employing Andy Coulson. I think people can feel it's a bit like a general election. If you're fed up with the effing Tories, give them a kick and then maybe we'll think again. This is totally different. I can tell him what's happening under this government. Inflation is down, unemployment's down, the economy is growing, the deficit's coming down. We face some tough and difficult times in our country, but we've got a government that is on the side of hard-working people. As he is one of the causes of the deficit, I think we've just found the first ever example of political masso-sadism.
Order! We all know what the Prime Minister meant.
I've just been to see Her Majesty the Queen, and I will now form a majority Conservative government. The question before the House today is how we keep the British people safe from the threat posed by ISIL. Oh, I think I know what my mother would say. I think she'd look across the dispatch box and she'd say, put on a proper suit, do up your tie, and sing the national anthem. Within the last hour, I've negotiated a deal to give the United Kingdom special status. I believe that this is enough for me to recommend that the United Kingdom remain in the European Union, having the best of both worlds.
So a 4-point lead for leaving the EU.
I think the country requires fresh leadership to take it in this direction.
The Times of David Cameron. Laura Kunsberg joins us, BBC's political editor. British politics, Laura, it's a brutal old business. Here's a man that won an overall majority against the odds only a year ago, thought he would stay till the spring of 2019, lost the referendum but still thought he could stay till September. That didn't work out. He's gone this afternoon. The removal van's already taken the furniture out.
I know, and we make people move house, which is one of the most stressful things for anybody. We make the Prime Minister move house in front of the world's waiting media. You know, this is a brutal, quick, rapid process that this time has happened at 1,000,000 miles an hour rather than the normal pace that it would happen at.
So rapid that I think, wasn't he helping to move the furniture into the van at
well,
one
it
stage?
looked a bit like it, but I wonder when he almost skipped back into number 10, humming a little tune to himself, I wonder actually if he has been doing the packing himself and rather enjoying it as he folds up the shirts. But I think, you know, just as we head towards Prime Minister's questions, one of the things that I think is worth saying about David Cameron is, for all that his plans have gone completely awry in the last couple of weeks, he is a Prime Minister who part of his memory will be that he really actually enjoyed Prime Minister's questions. Yeah. He was good at it. He's done it 146 times. He has a better attendance record than any previous recent Prime Minister of actually turning up at the dispatch box to do those questions week in, week out. And it tells you something about him, because the reason partly he's good at it and enjoys it is because he spent 20 years both as a Tory staffer and then an opposition politician, then opposition leader, every Wednesday being consumed by PMQs, learning the games, learning how to get your way through it. He's been good at it and he has enjoyed it, and that tells you something about the kind of politician he is. He's a creature of Westminster. He's been working here in one way or another since his early 20s, and I think that is one of the things people will remember.
Now, when Margaret Thatcher was forced to leave, her final PMQs and appearances, she was on steroids. We still run clips of her then. Mr. Cameron may be the same, but a difficult gig also for Jeremy Corbyn, who's got a leadership contest and needs to set the right tone, I would suggest.
Indeed, not least because John McDonnell, the Shadow Chancellor, has appalled some MPs by last night saying on stage, I don't know if you've discussed this already in the programme.
With censor, of course.
With the bleeps, yeah, so plenty of bleeps on show. So Jeremy Corbyn, who says, and has said repeatedly, he wants the party to come together. He said again last night, look, if Labour MPs have got a problem, they should just come and talk to me. Although many of them would say they've been talking to him for months and telling him to go, and he hasn't listened. He needs to strike that tone today. But amidst this huge ceremonial occasion almost for the Prime Minister as his final one, and if we know anything about David Cameron, I'm pretty sure that he will have a sort of vintage PMQ's joke ready to go to be unleashed at the opposition leader. But I think properly, some of Prime Minister's questions will feel a bit like a sort of tribute. Isn't David Cameron marvellous? Does the Prime Minister agree with me how marvellous he is?
No, please, no, not
what,
again.
Your favourite kinds of patsy questions, Andrew?
Question. Now, 24, or certainly 48 hours ago,
I've lost all sense of the time now.
Me too. Theresa May was planning a 2-month leadership campaign. Yeah. Now she's got to appoint a cabinet starting tonight. Do we have any indications of what's in her mind for the top jobs? Is Theresa Villiers still with a job? Or
well, as ever...
Maybe she's appointing Richard Bergen as a government of all the talents?
Well, Keith Vaz was praising Theresa May very fulsomely this morning, so you never know. Look, I think you're right. This whole thing has really been concertinaed. We know Theresa May is the kind of politician who likes to take her time to make up her mind. That privilege is being completely taken away from her. So, yes, of course, there are Westminster guessing games going on all over the place.
And they are just guessing games,
for
aren't they?
fun. They are just guessing games, absolutely. For fun, briefly, here are a few of them. There's a pretty widespread expectation that George Osborne will leave the Treasury. Philip Hammond, one of the few politicians thought to be close to Theresa May, will move in.
Former accountant,
safe pair of hands, former Chief Secretary to the Treasury, understands the department, understands money. That is very widely expected to happen. George Osborne's allies believe that that will be a job swap and he will go to be at the Foreign Secretary at the Foreign Office. But I think one of the most interesting things about the reshuffle, I think more interesting actually than the fact that there are likely to be many more women in the cabinet, because Theresa May's not going to give people a job just because they're a woman. She's going to appoint the best people that she thinks are placed for it. But what does she do about that trio who represent, in a lot of people's view, the best and the worst of the last 10 years of Tory politics? Boris Johnson, George Osborne and Michael Gove. What does she do with them? Does she clear them all out, which would send a very strong message, or does she keep them for continuity?
Hold that thought, because we're going to come back to it, but let us go to the final PMQs of David Cameron's premiership.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know the whole House will join me in congratulating Andy Murray, Heather Watson, Jordan Wiley, Gordon Reid and Alfie Hewitt on their stunning success at Wimbledon. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. Other than one meeting this afternoon with Her Majesty the Queen, the diary for the rest of my day is remarkably light.
Danny Kinahan. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and may I echo the Prime Minister's congratulations to Andrew Murray and all the other winners. But may we thank the Prime Minister for all his hard work and his leadership, and particularly his commitment to the Union and to Northern Ireland, visiting it often and swimming in Lough Erne, and maybe he'd like to come and swim in Lough Neagh. We look forward, the Ulster Unionist Party, to working with the next Prime Minister, and I'm told that there are lots of leadership roles out there at the moment. There's the England football team, there's Top Gear, there's even across the big pond a role that needs filling. But if I can go to my pet subject, Brexit really threatens... Thank you. Brexit really threatens the Union. Would the Prime Minister work with his successors to ensure that we have somebody that is going to pull together all the countries of the Union and the overseas territories and make it all so that we all work and thrive together?
Well, first of all, let me thank the honourable gentleman for his kind remarks and fascinating suggestions for future jobs. I think most of which sound even harder than this one, but so I think I'll pass. Look, I do believe Northern Ireland is stronger than it was 6 years ago, 58,000 more people in work, the full devolution of justice and home affairs delivered under this government, the Saville report published, and record inward investment in creating jobs in Northern Ireland. I care passionately about our United Kingdom, as I know he does and all of us do in this House. We do need to make sure that as we leave the European Union, we work out how to keep the benefits of the common travel area. Hard work is being done now with civil servants in Northern Ireland, in Whitehall, but also in the Republic of Ireland, and that work needs to quicken, the pace needs to quicken.
Jacques Lepresti.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to also pay tribute to my honourable friend and all the hard work he's done leading this great country for the last few years. Now, our honourable friend's lasting legacy will include supporting the Kurds, whose Peshmerga are bravely fighting Daesh in all our interests. Now, having visited the Peshmerga on the front line, I know that our airstrikes, weapons and training are crucial, but Peshmerga injuries could be reduced with additional equipment like body armour, respirators and frontline medical facilities, and we could possibly provide some beds in our specialist hospital in Birmingham to the most seriously injured. Does my honourable friend agree that this is a relatively small investment that will make a huge difference to our allies in our common fight to defeat the evil of terrorism?
Well, let me say to my honourable friend, first of all, thank you for his kind remarks. But also, he's absolutely right that the Kurds are incredibly brave fighters and are doing valuable work against Daesh in Iraq and Syria. I'll look carefully at his suggestion of using the Birmingham Hospital. The Queen Elizabeth Hospital has excellent facilities for battlefield casualties. Our army is already providing medical instruction to the Peshmerga to help them deal with these situations, but we will look and see if more can be done. But let's be frank, the strategy is working. Daesh is on the back foot. It's lost 45% of the territory it once held in Iraq. Its finances have been hit. More than 25,000 Daesh fighters have now been killed. Desertion has increased, and the flow of foreign fighters has fallen by 90%. I've always said this will take a long time to work in Iraq and Syria, but we must stick at it and we must stay the course.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could I start by joining the Prime Minister in paying tribute to the British winners at Wimbledon? Andy Murray, Heather Watson, Jordana Wiley, Alfie Hewitt and Gordon Reid. And also, I think it'd be nice if we congratulated Serena Williams on her fantastic achievement as well. Mr. Speaker, it's only right that after 6 years as Prime Minister, we thank the Right Honourable Member for Witney for his service. I've often disagreed with him, but there are some of his achievements I really want to welcome and pay recognition to today. One is to helping to secure the release of Shakar Amir from Guantanamo Bay and legislating to achieve equal marriage within our society. And I'm sure he would like to acknowledge that it was Labour votes that helped him to get it through on that occasion. But would he also, perhaps for a moment, express some concern at the way that homelessness has risen for the past 6 years and looks like it's going to continue to rise in this country?
Well, first of all, let me thank him for his kind remarks. I'll join him in paying tribute to Serena Williams, who's now, I think, knocked Steffi Graf's amazing record of 22 Grand Slams. She's overtaken that. Can I thank him for what he said about Shaker Armour? That was a case that this government raised again and again with the US government, and we're pleased that it's been resolved. I'd also thank him for what he said about equal marriage. There are 30,000 gay people in our country who in the last 6 years have been able to get married, and I think that is real progress. I'll never forget the day, actually, in Number 10, when one of the people who works very close to the front door said to me, I'm not that interested in politics, Mr. Cameron, but because of something your lot have done, I'm able to marry the person I've loved all my life this weekend. And that was, there are many amazing moments in this job, but that actually was one of my favourites. As for homelessness, it is still 10% below the peak that we saw under Labour, but the key is building more homes. We have built 700,000 homes since I became Prime Minister, but now we need to quicken the pace on that. But the key to building more homes is, yes, programmes like Help to Buy, yes, the reforms to the planning system, but the absolute key is a strong economy.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, I've been listening carefully to what the Home Secretary's been saying over the last few days, and she said it's harder than ever for young people to buy their first house. So does the Prime Minister think this is because of record low house building, or his government's apparent belief that £450,000 is an affordable starter home?
Well, first of all, let me say at the dispatch box how warmly I congratulate the Home Secretary on becoming leader of the Conservative Party. And when it comes to women Prime Ministers, I'm very pleased to be able to say pretty soon it's going to be 2-0. And not a pink bus in sight, Mr. Speaker. Now, on the issue of housing and homelessness, as I said, 700,000 homes have been delivered. He asks about this issue of affordability, which is absolutely key. When I became Prime Minister, because of what had happened to the mortgage market, a first-time buyer often needed to have as much as £30,000 to put a deposit down. Because of the combination of Help to Buy and shared ownership, some people are actually able to get on the housing ladder now with a deposit of as little as £2,000. And with the low mortgage rates as well, and the new houses we're building, we're making good progress.
Jeremy Corbyn. Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, the malaise seems a little deeper still. The Home Secretary said, so that it really, talking of the economy, she said, so that it really does work for everyone, because it's apparent to anyone in touch with the real world that people do not feel our economy works that way. Isn't she right that too many people in too many places in Britain feel their economy has been destroyed in towns they're in because the industries have gone, there are levels of high unemployment or underemployment and a deep sense of malaise? Don't we all need to address that question?
Well, if we're going to talk about the economic record, let's get the facts straight. We've cut the deficit by 2/3. There are 2.5 million more people in work in our country. There's almost 1 million more businesses. 2.9 million apprenticeships have been trained under this government. And when it comes to poverty, 300,000 fewer people in relative poverty, 100,000 fewer children in relative poverty. And to be accused of sloth in delivery by the right honourable gentleman, let's just take the last week. We both have been having these leadership elections. We got on with it. We've had resignation, nomination, competition and coronation. They haven't even decided what the rules are yet. If they ever got into power, it'd take them about a year to work out who would sit where.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Democracy is an exciting and splendid thing, and I'm enjoying every moment of it. The Home Secretary, Mr. Speaker, I was talking of the economy. The Home Secretary, again, she said, many people find themselves exploited by unscrupulous bosses. I can't imagine who she's referring to. Discussions with the Home Secretary, could he enlighten us as to whether or not there is any proposal to take on Agency Britain by banning zero-hours contracts, clamping down on umbrella companies, repealing the Trade Union Act, or preferably all three?
Well, he's right that democracy is a splendid thing. I have to agree with him about that. Let me answer very directly on exploitation in the workplace. It's this government that, for the first time, has introduced a national living wage. That is a huge change. It's this government that has massively increased the power of the Gangmasters Licensing Authority. There are record fines for businesses that don't pay the minimum wage, and much more policing and prosecutions taking place. All of those things have changed under this government. And as for zero-hours contracts, they account for less than 1 in 40 people in work. 60% of people on zero-hours contracts do not want to work more hours. And it was this government that did something the Labour Party never did, which was to ban exclusive zero-hours contracts. 13 years of Labour, but it took a coalition Conservative government to do it. Let me say something to him about the democratic process of leadership elections, because I did say a couple of weeks ago that I thought it was... I have to say I'm beginning to admire his tenacity. He is reminding me of the Black Knight in Monty Python's Holy Grail. He's been kicked so many times, but he says, keep going, it's only a flesh wound. I admire that.
Mr. Speaker, I would like the Prime Minister to address another issue that the House voted on last week. And I've got a question from Nina, who said... No, hang on. Yeah. It's a question from somebody who deserves an answer. And she says, I would like to know if there is any possibility that a European Union citizen who has lived in Britain for 30 years can have their right of permanent residence revoked or deported depending on the Brexit negotiations. There has been no clear answer to this question. It is one that worries a very large number of people, and it would be good if in his last question time the Prime Minister could at least offer some assurance to those people.
let me reassure Nina, there's absolutely no chance of that happening to someone in those circumstances. We are working hard to do what we want, which is to give a guarantee to EU citizens that they will have their rights respected, all those who have come to this country. The only circumstance I could ever envisage a future government trying to undo that guarantee would be if British citizens in other European countries didn't have their rights respected. So I think it is important to have reciprocity. But the new Prime Minister will be working to give that guarantee as fast as we can. I'm glad he mentions emails, because actually I've got an email as well. Now, I got this, I'm not making this up, I promise. I got this on the 16th of September 2015 from someone called Judith, and she said this: please, please keep dignity and not triumphalism during the first PMQs today with Jeremy Corbyn. And she gave this reason. She said, because Tom Watson, who may oust Jeremy Corbyn, is a very different kettle of fish. He's experienced, organised and far more dangerous in the long term. She goes on, so sensible, sober, polite answers to Mr Corbyn. Let him create his own party disunity. After this is over, I've got to find Judith and find out what on earth happens next.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Mr Speaker, I've had the pleasure of asking the Prime Minister 179 questions. And thank you. Well, there are plenty more to come to his successor. Don't worry about that. But before I ask him the last question, could I just put it on record and wish him well as he leaves this office, and also to wish his family well, Samantha and their children, because I think we should all recognise that whilst many of us really do enjoy our jobs and our political life, it's the loved ones nearest to us and our families that actually make enormous sacrifices that we may be able to do this. So I'd also like him to pass on my thanks to his mum for her advice about ties and suits and songs. It's extremely kind of her, and I'd be grateful if he'd pass that on to her personally. And I'm reflecting on the lesson that she offered. But I've got one rumour that I want him to deal with. There's a rumour going round that his departure has been carefully choreographed so he can slip seamlessly into the vacancy created this morning on Strictly by Len Goodman's departure. Is that his next career?
I don't really have a paso doble, so no, I can promise that is not the case. Let me say to him, first of all, thank you for the kind remarks and the good wishes to my amazing wife Samantha and my lovely children, who are all watching from the gallery today. He's absolutely right. The pressure is often bears hardest on those we love around us in these jobs, and let me send my best wishes to his family as well. I've done a bit of research, Mr Speaker. I have addressed 5,500 questions from this dispatch box. I'll leave it for others to work out how many I've answered. Because of your belief in letting everyone have their say, I think I've done a record of 92 hours of statements from this dispatch box, as well as some very enjoyable liaison committee appearances and other things. I will certainly send his good wishes back to my mother. He seems to have taken her advice and is looking absolutely splendid today. But it gives me the opportunity to put a rumour to rest as well, even more serious than the Strictly Come Dancing one. And he'll appreciate this because El Gato, his cat, is particularly famous. And the rumour that somehow I don't love Larry. I do. And I have photographic evidence to prove it. Sadly, I can't take Larry with me. He belongs to the house and the staff love him very much, as do I.
Mr Peter Lilly.
Is my right honourable friend aware that in 33 years in this House, watching 5 Prime Ministers and several ex-Prime Ministers, I've seen him achieve a mastery of that dispatch box unparalleled in my time. Not just because of his command of detail, of his wit, but because he commands the respect of friend and foe alike, who know that he's driven not just by legitimate political ambitions and ideas, but by a sense of duty, which he always leads him to try to make this country more prosperous, more solvent, more tolerant, more fair and more free. And he will
command the respect of generations to come.
Those words mean a lot from my right honourable friend who spent so much time in this House. It is a special place, and I think Prime Minister's Questions, for all its theatrics, does have a purpose, because it's a time when every week the Prime Minister has to know absolutely everything that is going on in Whitehall, and often you find out things that you want to stop pretty quickly before 12 o'clock on a Wednesday. I believe that politics is about public service in the national interest, and that is what I've always tried to do. This session does have some admirers around the world. I remember when I did his job and I met Mayor Bloomberg in New York, and we walked down the street and everyone knew Mike Bloomberg, and everyone came up and said, "Mayor, you're doing a great job." No one had a clue who I was until eventually someone said, "Hey, Cameron, Prime Minister's Questions, we love your show."
Mr. Angus Robertson.
Thank you very much, and I join the Prime Minister and the leader of the Labour Party in paying tribute to all of the winners at Wimbledon. This week we mark the 21st anniversary of the Srebrenica genocide. It's one of the few political causes that the Prime Minister and I both wholeheartedly support, and I hope he will be impressing on his successor the importance of supporting the Remembering Srebrenica organisation and all of the good work that it does across the UK. Notwithstanding our differences, I genuinely extend my best personal wishes to the Prime Minister and to his family. I wish them all the best. However,
Don't spoil it.
the Prime Minister's legacy will undoubtedly be that he has taken us to the brink of being taken out of the European Union, so we will not be applauding his premiership on these benches. What advice has he given his successor on taking Scotland out of the EU against the wishes of Scottish voters?
Well, first of all, let me join the right honourable gentleman in paying tribute to all those who lost their lives in Srebrenica and making sure that we commemorate this event properly every year. This year there will be a service in the Foreign Office where commemoration will be given, where testimony will be read out, and we should think of it alongside the terrible events of modern history, such as the Holocaust, and think about it in that way. It also, I think, reminds us, as we often debate in this House, there's a price for intervention, but there's also sometimes a price from non-intervention, and we should remember that. In terms of what he says about Scotland and the United Kingdom and Europe, my advice to my successor, who is a brilliant negotiator, is that we should try to be as close to the European Union as we can be for the benefits of trade, of cooperation and of security. The channel will not get any wider once we leave the European Union, and that is the relationship we should seek. That will be good for the United Kingdom and good for Scotland.
Angus Robertson.
The Prime Minister's successor is very, very well known in Scotland at the present time. It's across all the front pages because of the threat to deport the very much loved and liked Brain family from the Highlands. The first vote of her premiership is likely to be imposing Trident against the wishes of almost every single MP from Scotland. Meanwhile, she says she plans to plough on. With Brexit, regardless of the fact that Scotland voted to remain in the EU. How does the outgoing Prime Minister think that all of this will go down in Scotland?
Well, first of all, specifically on the Brain family, Mrs. Brain came to this country on a Tier 4 visa, on a student visa, to study for a Scottish history degree. She completed it, and her husband and her son came as dependents. We've given them an extension to the 1st of August to put in an application for a work visa in the normal way, and I very much hope that will happen. On Trident, there will be a vote in this House, and it's right this House should decide, and actually many people in Scotland support our nuclear deterrent, maintaining it, and the jobs that come in Scotland. He asks about the record of this government when it comes to Scotland. Well, I'll tell him what it is. 143,000 more people in work in Scotland. Massive investment in the renewable industries in Scotland. The 2 biggest warships ever built in our history, built in Scotland. A powerhouse parliament, a referendum that was legal, decisive and fair, and, I might add, a Scotsman winning Wimbledon twice while I was Prime Minister. Never mind Indy 2, I think it's time for Andy 2.
Jane Churchill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank the Prime Minister for the leadership he's shown, particularly in his support of women within the Conservative Party. The Prime Minister's legacy for me, however, and for fellow cancer survivors, is the personal support that he has shown for the Cancer Drug Fund. However, today I would like him to ask him to show that same support for those who've been affected by the contaminated blood. Would he please update the House as to whether they too will have a legacy?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for what she says about the Cancer Drugs Fund. It has helped many families and many people in our country. She's absolutely right to raise this issue of contaminated blood. And I can today announce that we will be spending the extra £125 million we've identified in a much fairer and more comprehensive scheme. We'll guarantee that all those infected will, for the first time, receive a regular annual payment. This will include all those with hepatitis stage 1, who will now receive £3,500 per year, rising to £4,500 per year by the end of the Parliament. For those with hepatitis C at stage 2, HIV or co-infected with both, annual payments will increase over the lifetime of the Parliament and will enhance the support for those who've been bereaved or those who will be in future, significantly boosting the money for the discretionary payments. Last year, I apologised to the victims on behalf of the British Government for something that should never have happened. Today, I'm proud to provide them with the support that they deserve. And while it's not right to pick out two people, I think people should know that coming to constituency surgeries, making your point to your Member of Parliament, campaigning as these sufferers have done, in my case, David Ledbetter and Matthew Davis, repeatedly coming to my surgery and saying this mustn't stand, more must be done. I know that not everyone will be fully satisfied with what's being done, but it does show our democracy working and compassion in replying to this terrible problem.
Jeff Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister came to office promising to keep the UK's AAA rating, to end top-down NHS reorganisations and to stop his party banging on about Europe. How would you say that's gone?
Well, I think in terms of the economic record, 2.5 million more jobs, the deficit cut by 2/3, 2.9 million apprenticeships, 1 million more businesses, a growth rate that's been at the top of the developed world, all of that because of the choices that we made. And because we did that, we've been able to back our NHS with a 10% funding increase, over 10 billion in real terms in this Parliament. As for Europe, we have to settle these issues. And I think it's right, when you're trying to settle a really big constitutional issue, you don't just rely on Parliament, you ask the people as well. We made a promise and we kept a promise.
Steve Brine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm very sorry this turns out to be my last question to the Prime Minister, but I want to thank him for everything he's done for my constituency, where every school is now good or outstanding, and the jobless total is down 64% since he took office. As he prepares to leave Downing Street, can I encourage him to return to the big society agenda that I know he's so passionate about? And can I ask him if he remembers saying shortly before becoming Prime Minister, politicians are a mixture of egotism and altruism, and you just hope the right one wins out so people do the right thing rather than the politically convenient thing. It seems to me that he's stayed on the right side of that divide in the last 6 years, not least in the manner of his departure, and I think this country's going to miss him a great deal.
Can I thank my friend for his very kind remarks? I think when it comes to education, I think there's a very strong record to build on. We've got 1.4 million more children in good or outstanding schools than in 2010. We've seen the free schools movement really take off, with over 300 free schools open. I visited one yesterday that is outstanding. A quarter of them are outstanding, which is an amazing record when you think how little time they've had to get going. And so I think we should build on that record. As for the big society, yes, we should use a stronger economy to build a bigger and stronger society. And one of the things that we are doing is introducing national citizen service. 200,000 young people have taken part in that programme, and I hope by the end of this Parliament it will be the norm for 16-year-olds to take part. We talk about the soft skills that are necessary to give people real-life chances. Well, many people don't get those chances, and national citizen service will help them.
Graham Stringer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for the courteous way he's always answered questions I've managed to ask him. I've always listened carefully to his answers, but until I had 2 eye operations, I wasn't able to see him very clearly. Is he as concerned as I am about the newspaper reports that people who aren't entitled to NHS cataract operations are jumping the queue and stopping people who are entitled to NHS operations having that treatment?
Well, I will look very carefully. First of all, can I thank him for his kind remarks? I've tried to answer questions from this dispatch box. It's difficult sometimes when you haven't seen the specific story, and I haven't seen the story here. I recall from previous occasions that we are still investing in these cataract operations, and the number receiving them are going up. But I'll look carefully this afternoon at the question he asked about the danger of queue jumping and get back to him.
Wendy Morton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Under the leadership of my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, in my constituency of Aldridge Brownhills, unemployment has dropped from 5.1% in May 2010 to 1.9% in May this year. A record to be proud of and one I would like to thank him for. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that this has only been possible thanks to his firm focus on jobs, apprenticeships and skills, the strong economy and investment?
Well, the figures are remarkable. When a constituency is getting to 1.9% in terms of unemployment, that is very, very close to full employment, and it's a remarkable record. What we've done with apprenticeships was 2.4 million in the last Parliament, an extra 500,000 already in this Parliament, towards the target of 3 million in this Parliament, which I'm confident if we work hard we can achieve it. And we should think, Mr. Speaker, these are not just numbers on a page. They're real people who have experience of the workplace, who are learning a trade and are taking their first steps in their career. And what I want is when they get that career, not only do we have the national living wage, but we also make sure that people don't start paying income tax until they're earning a good wage. And we've taken 4 million of the lowest paid people in our country out of income tax altogether. That is a record to be proud of.
Mr. Adrian Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week is Black Country Week. Yesterday, Black Country manufacturers were in Parliament demonstrating the high-quality products that are exported worldwide. Will the outgoing Prime Minister impress upon the incoming Prime Minister the huge importance of maintaining access to the EU single market during Brexit negotiations in order that we can maximise the Black Country contribution to exports, productivity and jobs?
Well, I absolutely agree with the honourable gentleman. What we've seen in the West Midlands is 173,000 more people in work under this government, and we have seen something of a renaissance in manufacturing, particularly in the automotive sector, some of which is indeed in the Black Country. And it is vital for that industry that we have proper access to the single market, and I think he's right, this is going to be one of the things we've absolutely got to focus on. I want automotive, aerospace, these high-quality manufacturing firms to go from strength to strength in our country, and making sure we get that vital access to Europe is going to be vital.
Robin Walker.
10 years ago today, I was applying to become Conservative parliamentary candidate for Labour-held Worcester, as my right honourable friend was uniting the opposition and preparing it for government. Like so many on these benches, I entered this House in the week that he first became Prime Minister. And since that time, unemployment in Worcester has halved, apprenticeships have doubled. We have more good and outstanding schools, beginning to receive fairer funding. Wages are up and taxes are down. Can I thank my right honourable friend for all his service to our nation and for the legacy of improved life chances he will leave behind?
Well, can I thank him for his kind remarks? We've seen unemployment fall in all of these constituencies. We've seen the claimant count go down. I think more important is we now see 450,000 fewer children in households where nobody works. And thinking of the effect of having a parent or a loved one in work helping to put food on the table and provide a role model for their children, that's really what this is all about. So I thank him for his kind remarks.
Carol Monaghan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Between broken vows, Brexit and the likely renewal of weapons of mass destruction in the Clyde, the Prime Minister has done more for Scottish independence than many of us on these benches could ever hope to do. So As he contemplates a move to Aberdeenshire, could the Prime Minister now make his commitment to Scottish independence official by visiting smp.org/join?
What I'd say to the Honourable Lady, and indeed to all the SNP members of Parliament, is when you have Lord Smith himself saying that the vow to create a powerhouse Parliament was kept, the SNP should pay attention to that and recognise a promise was made and a promise was delivered. I've talked many times at this dispatch box about creating this powerhouse Parliament. What I haven't seen is the SNP using any of the powers they've now got.
Finally, Mr. Kenneth Clark.
Mr. Speaker, can I first of all join with all those in thanking the Prime Minister for the statesmanlike leadership that he's given to our party and to the country for the last 6 years, and to thank him particularly on this occasion for the debating eloquence, but also the wit and the humour that he's always brought to Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday. And can I ask that, as no doubt he will have some plans for a slightly more enjoyable and relaxed Wednesday morning and lunchtime, nevertheless he will still be an active participant in this House as it faces a large number of problems over the next few years. As no two people know what Brexit means at the moment, we need his advice and his statesmanship as much as we ever have.
Can I thank my right honourable friend for his very kind remarks? I remember one of the toughest conversations I had in politics was actually when I was leader of the opposition, and I was trying to get him to join my front bench, and he was on a bird-watching holiday in Patagonia, and it was almost impossible to persuade him to come back. Not many people know this, but actually his first act as Chancellor of the Exchequer was to fire me as a special advisor, and I'm very proud of the fact that one of my first acts was to appoint him to my cabinet in the coalition government, and I know the then Deputy Prime Minister will join me in saying that he provided great wisdom, great thoughtfulness, great ballast at a time of national difficulty in the advice that he gave us. He's not always the easiest person to get hold of. We've tried. Tory modernisation has never quite got as far as getting Ken Clarke to carry a mobile phone. He did briefly have one, but he said the problem is people keep ringing me on it. And we had to move, I seem to remember, in opposition, we had to move our morning meeting to accommodate his 9 o'clock cigar. But I will watch these exchanges from the backbenches. I will miss the roar of the crowd. I will miss the barbs from the opposition. But I will be willing you on. And when I say willing you on, I don't just mean willing on the new Prime Minister at this dispatch box, or indeed just willing on the front bench defending the manifesto that I helped to put together. But I mean willing all of you on, because people come here with huge passion for the issues they care about. They come here with great love for the constituencies that they represent. And also willing on this place. Because, yes, we can be pretty tough and test and challenge our leaders, perhaps more than some other countries, but that is something we should be proud of, and we should keep at it. And I hope you will all keep at it, and I will will you on as you do. The last thing I'd say is that you can achieve a lot of things in politics. You can get a lot of things done, and that, in the end, the public service, the national interest, that is what it's all about. Nothing is really impossible if you put your mind to it. After all, as I once said, I was the future once.
And the Prime Minister finishes there with a little speech, a little homily. He's getting a standing ovation from the Conservative side. Doesn't look like a standing ovation from the Labour side, but they are giving applause on the Labour, the opposition side too. Speaker of the House applauding as well. So Mr. Cameron's final Prime Minister's questions comes to an end. No one bothering about the convention that you're not meant to applaud in the House. That seems to be broken quite regularly these days. The Prime Minister began by saying that his diary was remarkably light this afternoon. Samantha, his wife, and his 3 children were at the Prime Minister's questions. Apparently, one of the children, Nancy, was waving and cheering every time Tory MPs cheered, and she was even waving her cuddly doll at the Prime Minister as well. Sadly, the House of Commons doesn't give us these pictures. Jeremy Corbyn thanked the Prime Minister for his service. The applause, as you hear, still going on for the Prime Minister as he ends PMQs. But then Mr Corbyn went on to familiar themes that he has brought to PMQs since September of last year about homelessness, about the cost of starter homes, about the state of the economy. Mr Cameron batted them off, but he was also at pains to point out that when it comes to women Prime Ministers, it's now 2-0 to the Conservatives. And as he remarked, probably looking at Harriet Harman, not a pig bus in sight. He said that he thought Jeremy Corbyn reminded him of the Black Knight in the Holy Grail. Remember that scene where the Black Knight loses an arm, another arm, a leg, but everything is just a flesh wound and he keeps on. And Mr Corbyn, in return, thanked Mr Cameron's mum for her dress advice, and indeed the Leader of the Opposition looked pretty smart today. So there we have it, the final Prime Minister's questions of David Cameron. He will now see some people in the House. He'll go back to Downing Street, and then at around 5 o'clock this evening he will go to the Palace formally to resign as Prime Minister, followed rather quickly by Theresa May to become this country's next Prime Minister. Laura Kuenssberg, BBC political editor, is with us as always on these occasions. Your thoughts, Laura?
Well, I think it was a bit more like Prime Minister's stand-up than Prime Minister's questions today, wasn't it? And I think most of the MPs on the benches wanted there to be quite a sort of warm, light mood today, a ceremonial occasion really, rather than a day when any sort of serious policy discussion was done. A word though, briefly, there was one policy announcement in there. The Prime Minister announced more than £100 million for victims of a contaminated blood scandal. That's something that's been a terrible incident for MPs hearing these awful stories from their constituents. So there was a little bit of meat in terms of what he was saying. But, you know, overall, I think we saw David Cameron remarkably light-hearted on what must be quite a painful day, with huge numbers of pre-prepared Corbyn jokes that he relished delivering at the expense of the opposition.
Script writers have been working hard.
Unusually, though, Mr Corbyn had a few jokes back at him.
He did,
you know,
indeed.
and actually quite cleverly used some of the comments Theresa May has made during her pitch for the leadership about things the government has not got right to put back to David Cameron to try to use them to press him on some of his favourite issues.
And the Prime Minister was quite clear that existing EU nationals in this country should remain with all the rights they have at the moment. But that is not Theresa May's position, is it?
Well, I think that's the goal we all share. I think, you know, our new Prime Minister is rightly quite cautious because she wants to make sure that we secure the interests of Brits living in Europe. But we all want to get to a position where, you know, all EU citizens who are currently here are able to stay, with obviously limited exceptions in terms of those who've committed criminal offences.
Of course, but should they be a bargaining card, or should we just give these EU nationals the rights regardless of how Europe might treat our nationals there?
Well, I think it's, you know, we all want to have the position of EU nationals in this country secured and to enable them to stay on the basis on which they came. But I think we do have to exercise a degree of common sense and ensure that we also do all we can to secure the rights of UK citizens living in the rest of Europe.
You're going to miss them, aren't you?
Yes, I was in at the start of the Cameron project, and I mean, I remember when I was campaigning for his leadership, and there were people who said, oh, well, you know, can he really cope with Prime Minister's questions? And I think he's demonstrated week in, week out for the last 11 years that he's a fabulous performer at Prime Minister's questions.
End of an era, perhaps, for the Conservatives as well, in the sense that Mr Cameron was criticised for running a very sort of public school government, a very Notting Hill set government. We now have another grammar school Prime Minister who is not surrounded by public school people. We know Steve Webb from a very ordinary council house background, a number of them like that. Even Michael Gove, as an Aberdeen grammar school boy, managed to take out 3 Bullingdon boys in the space of 48 hours. It's going to be a little different for Labour now, isn't it?
It will be a little different. Laura said earlier that David Cameron was very much, in her words, a creature of Westminster, and I agree with Laura Kuenssberg on that. He was a creature of Westminster. He's a very able performer, as we saw in Parliament today, but I do think the country needs somebody that's not a creature of Westminster and someone who's a bit more than a performer. But things are changing, and the challenge for the Conservative Party is, as you say, Andrew, to become more representative of the society that it seeks to represent.
Mr. Cameron, but the reminiscent there of Tony Blair at the end when he left, he also, well, I think he got a standing ovation on both sides,
On both sides of the House.
Of the House. He'd won 3 elections, something that Labour forgets every now and then, I would suggest. But Mr. Cameron was more of a Commons man than Tony Blair. Tony Blair never really liked the Commons that much.
Indeed, and you sense that with David Cameron's final performance. You know, he seemed to be enjoying every single moment. And people would often say, if you look back at other things in his career, it's often actually his performances in the Commons that have been some of his best moments. His response, for example, to the Bloody Sunday inquiry, an enormously important, emotional statement that he gave in the House of Commons after a process that had started long before he was in charge, really, and the product of a different political generation, really. But the Commons is somewhere where he has absolutely excelled, and even, you know, performer to the last. His last line, clearly he'd thought about it carefully, quoting back himself from his first ever Prime Minister questions, where he said to Tony Blair, "You were the future once." Today, his last line, "I was the future once."
Well, that's an interesting point, and that's probably right that he was the future once. But he is only 50.
Yeah, the youngest Prime Minister to leave number 10 for a long time.
Do we rule out entirely that it's all over? I mean, in America, he could come back. Maybe not in this country. In France, he could come back.
I think that his legacy will be so shaped by his biggest gamble on the referendum going wrong that it would be very difficult for him to come back, and I'm not sure that he would want to. Remember, part of the reason he's in this situation is because during the last general election campaign, he said he wasn't going to stick it out, he wouldn't serve a 3rd term, and that has shaped, really, everything that's happened in his premiership since then.
He didn't quite recover from that, did he?
He didn't quite recover from that.
Let me just interrupt. I think we're going to
go
go to some helicopter shots, Laura. They're lining up outside Parliament. There's the helicopter shot. That's the inner courtyard of the Palace of Westminster. One of them, there's quite a few. They're lining up, waiting for him to come out, some of the staff of the House of Commons. Laura, what do you make of this?
Well, just these are pictures from Carriage Gate, where any moment now we expect him to come out. He'll then be picked up by the Prime Minister's cars. They'll swoop out and then make the short journey up Whitehall to Downing Street before later on we're expecting him to come out and give some words before he goes off to see the Queen to do the formal part of today's proceedings. Worth saying, though, just when we were reflecting on what David Cameron does next, Theresa was mentioning earlier, look, Theresa May is inheriting a government with a majority of 12.
Yes.
David Cameron is going to need to turn up and go through the lobbies for the government to get his business done. Theresa May going to have the same issue that he had with a sort of awkward squad, a group of about 25, 30 MPs, many of them Eurosceptics, who will be perfectly prepared to cause trouble if they don't like what she's doing. So David Cameron, as somebody who's sort of in the middle of the Tory party, is going to have to be around every now and then. Whether he chooses to speak from the back benches or get involved in issues, that's something that we'll have to wait and see. You certainly sense, as we wait for people to come out to watch his last journey out of the Commons as Prime Minister, that he feels now, just from the look of him, pretty relieved in a sense that it's all over.
I wonder if he's still going to be singing when he comes out.
Well,
maybe a different song.
He might know today a lesson you might have thought he'd have learned some time ago, that whenever there's a microphone near, maybe he all meant us to hear him singing a song. Who knows?
Well, either that, or we are fortunate that the politicians always forget in the end, Laura.
Yes.
And it gives us something to do. Theresa Villiers, all the candidates for the leadership of your party sort of positioned themselves on the centre, even to some extent on the centre-left, on talk of infrastructure funds, talk of doing a lot more for the North, workers on the board. Theresa May was talking about publishing ratios of top pay to average pay. Is the Parliamentary Tory Party signed on to all of that kind of approach?
Absolutely. I think there will be a lot of support for it. There is a recognition that there's excesses in corporate pay that need some constraints through more active shareholders and more transparency, giving more power to shareholders. So that, I think, is a welcome agenda.
Would command a majority of backbenchers and also of the party in the country, you think? Because it is I mean, people call it it's a one nation plus agenda, of course, if any of us delivered it.
But also, I think we're going to see a lot about making the United Kingdom a really competitive place to do business, with the sorts of ideas George Osborne has floated about reducing business taxes, and that sort of push of investment into infrastructure is going to be a great way to create jobs.
So, let's just assume, that's a big assumption, that the May government, which we'll soon be talking about, does a lot of this. doesn't that push Labour more to the left? Because they're occupying not just the centre-right, not just the centre, they're moving into the centre-left as well. How do you tackle that?
I don't think that Labour's political positioning should depend upon the Conservative government's political positioning. I think Labour needs to be true to itself, decide what we believe in, pursue what we believe in, and put a positive case to the country. And I believe that the next general election, whenever it will be, however left the Conservative government may attempt to paint itself, there will be a real choice before the British electorate between a very different approach to the economy and everything else.
We shall see. Of course, it is a big assumption that they do what they say when they're campaigning for the leadership. Laura, quick thought, then we'll go to Joko.
Interesting, though, lots of those ideas we've heard this week that Theresa May said the other day were actually Vince Cable's ideas during coalition that she put forward. But one important broader point, Theresa May seems to have resolved on continuing David Cameron's mission in one way of trying to tether the Conservatives to the centre ground. And actually, whether they like it or not, Labour, therefore, will have to respond to that context. As you say, Richard, of course, most people in your party will want to stick to Euro principles, but the government sets the context by the things that they put forward, that Westminster and then politicians right around the country have to respond to.
And many people will think that Mr Cameron's legacy was that he did move and put into concrete his party's position on the centre ground.
And if that comes down to be his achievement, that's something that he will be very pleased about.
Joko's been waiting patiently. She's in the House of Commons. Let's go straight over to her in the central lobby. Jo.
Yes, thank you, Andrew. All the MPs are streaming out of the chamber behind me and everybody who is watching in the public gallery. I have managed to grab two Conservative MPs. They're with me now, Ed Vaizey and Harriet Baldwin. Welcome, both smiling. There were some jokes, no doubt about it, in final PMQs for David Cameron. You'd expect that. But he is going to be defined, isn't he, his legacy by Brexit?
Well, obviously Brexit is the reason he's leaving. So yes, it will define to a large extent his legacy. But I think what was good about PMQs today was we talked about all the other things that he's done. I mean, the stunning turnaround of our economy, and Harriet's a finance minister, and also his life chances strategy, social mobility. More jobs, more opportunities in this country, many more than when he started as Prime Minister.
Right, Theresa May will be the next Prime Minister. You backed Michael Gove in the leadership contest. Are you regretting that now?
Well, thanks for reminding everyone, Jo. That's incredibly helpful. I think what we know is that Harriet backed Theresa May, and also what I'm really pleased to read about in my newspapers today is that Theresa May is going to promote a lot of women. I think it would be absolutely fantastic if we see a cabinet that is gender balanced.
Right, and you are hoping to be in that cabinet?
No, not at all. I'm just so pleased, though, that Theresa's taking over as Prime Minister, because she did do so much to bring more women into the party, but we should also credit David Cameron with that. He did an enormous amount with the A-list initially, but also with Women to Win, and he's left a legacy of there actually being 4 times as many women MPs in the Conservative Party as when he took over as leader.
Right, I'm just going to interrupt briefly because I think we are showing pictures now of David Cameron leaving the Houses of Parliament. He'll be heading back, or making the short journey back to 10 Downing Street, of course, before he goes to the Queen to tender his resignation. So people can watch that as it's happening. But let's continue our conversation here and talk about the next government and what it will look like. You talked about promoting women, and there's no doubt Theresa May did a lot to mentor and help women in Parliament. What should be her priority, her main priority in this government? Will it just be about EU negotiations?
Well, she's articulated it very clearly that she wants the economy to work for everybody, and I think that...
What does that mean, though? Everyone says that.
Well, I think one of the things she highlighted was some of the problems with corporate pay and some of the issues about payment for failure. She was trying to make a point about having someone who was a representative of the employees on the board, like they do in Germany. She is going to have to focus very much on the economy, because obviously we've got to negotiate this Brexit in the way that works for the opportunities that it presents for the economy as well as the challenges. So that's going to be an important part of what she focuses on.
Was it a tactical error to say that EU foreign nationals would be up for negotiation when she talks about UK leaving the EU?
She's made it very clear that what she wants to have happen here is for all of the over 1 million people living in other EU countries, that they also get the same negotiation as people who are living here and who've made their lives here. And so it's important to remember that aspect of it in terms of the discussions with other countries.
What about unifying the party? I was in the chamber as well for this momentous occasion. I spied Boris Johnson in the far corner. He couldn't have got further away from David Cameron. Maybe he was just late. That's going to be hard for her, isn't it?
Well, he was standing close to me, so maybe I'll be a bridge to bring Boris back into the party. But I think we are all unified behind Theresa May. We know that she has outstanding qualities and an outstanding record already in government, and I don't think the parliamentary party will certainly brook anyone doing noises off at such a crucial time for our country.
But should
with a new
people like
Prime
Boris
Minister.
Johnson and Michael Gove be in the cabinet? Would that take it a
absolutely-
bridge, as you would put it, a bridge into both sides?
That's completely a matter for the new Prime Minister Theresa May, and I think anyone should agree to serve her in any capacity, either in her government or supporting her from the backbenches, regardless of who you are.
All right, well, the changing of the guard is happening as we speak. Thank you to both of you. And with that, it's back to you, Andrew.
Thanks, Joko. We're just taking pictures from our helicopter as the Prime Minister, small cavalcade, leaves the House of Commons and heads back to Downing Street. As he goes through, I think that bit is the Foreign Office building, to go through into Downing Street there for his final afternoon as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. You see the cars pulling up there on the side street, not in the main part of Downing Street, just in the side street there, as he begins his new life as a former Prime Minister of this country. There aren't many around. John Major, Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, I think that's about it. And of course, as a former Prime Minister, for the rest of his life, wherever he goes, whatever he does, he will have to have security with him. That never goes away. It's one of the penalties that you pay for being a leader of this country and of course of other countries as well. There's Mr. Cameron going back into Downing Street, preparing later this afternoon to go to see the Queen in Buckingham Palace, quickly followed by Theresa May, who will then go to see the Queen to officially to become the Prime Minister of this country. So, one leadership power struggle, if I can put it that way, is gone. The Conservatives have chosen their leader. The country therefore has a new Prime Minister. She can command a majority in Parliament. That's what matters in this country. And we await to see what happens with the other power struggle, which is for the leader of the Labour Party. That is already underway. Let's go now to Mark Lobel. He's been following this, and there are some latest developments. Mark, what can you tell us now about the latest news from the Labour leadership contest?
Well, from the fraught, chaotic battle meeting yesterday of the NEC, Andrew, where Jeremy Corbyn won that decisive vote 14-18 to get automatically on the ballot, not needing those 51 nominations, MPs and MEPs. I've been told by two senior Labour sources that they're not going to challenge that because it was such a decisive victory, and they said it simply would not work. But the febrile atmosphere that we're in at the moment, where this contest is being played out, meant that it was a secret ballot because people were afraid of retaliation. And also, the constituency Labour parties meetings and branch meetings are going to be suspended until a leader is elected. But we've got more information on that leadership election. Anyone who wants to throw their hat in the ring has to do so by this time next week. And also, we'll have a result in just around 2 months' time on the 24th of September, one day before Labour's annual conference.
Mark, we have two challengers to Mr. Corbyn at the moment. We know about Owen Smith and Angela Eagle. Is there any talk that they may come under pressure to narrow themselves down to one, to have one challenger to Mr. Corbyn?
Yes, I've been told by a senior Labour figure that there's a 100% chance that they'll be whittled down to one within the week. So we'll see if that actually happens. But whoever it is, whether it's one or two, they've had some very good news from yesterday's NEC meeting because of what they decided about who's going to vote for that election. But what they said is that they were going to freeze membership. So anyone who has joined from the 12th of, up until the 12th of January this year will get a vote. But the 113,000 people, that surge of members who many thought were a majority pro-Corbyn, will not get a vote. And that's because Jeremy Corbyn wasn't in the room when an amendment against that vote, which came in at 14 all, was brought. So if he'd been in there, he would have had one more vote and he could have blocked that. So he's lost a block of votes there. But secondly, the key registered supporters are going to be taken away, which means that if you look at the results from before, 50% or 51% of members and affiliated supporters for Jeremy Corbyn backed him, which means it'll be a very tight contest on these terms.
All right, Mark, thank you for that. We've just learned that Theresa May dined with the Chief Rabbi just on the eve of becoming Prime Minister. That'll probably leave the Archbishop of Canterbury a bit miffed, and she's a vicar's daughter too. I mean, what's going on? Tell me, can you tell us simply, who's allowed to vote in the Labour leadership?
Well, Labour Party members who joined before the January cut-off date that's been mentioned can vote. members of affiliated trade unions that pay the political levy can vote, and people who register as supporters for £25 in a 48-hour window between Thursday and Saturday can vote. I'd actually like to see more people being able to vote. I agreed with Angela Eagle and Neil Kinnock and others when they said people should be able to join and vote now. I think we should have as open and inclusive contest as possible, including as many people as possible.
But people watching now, if they wanted to join the Labour Party, fresh, they've not been members before, could they do that now, paying the full fee if they had to, and get the vote?
As it stands, they would have to become registered supporters between Thursday and Saturday in that 48-hour window at the cost of £25. I would say that £25 cost does disturb me. We shouldn't be pricing Labour supporters out of their rightful vote.
We're all going to have to go away and study the Labour voting rules. I thank you both for being with us on this historic day. That's it. We thank all of our guests. The 1 o'clock news is starting over on BBC One now. Joe and I will be here tomorrow at noon with all the big political stories of the day. And of course, there will be continuing coverage of political events here as we move from Prime Minister Cameron to Prime Minister May, and both of them visit the Queen later this afternoon. Keep tuned to BBC News and BBC One for all these events. Bye-bye.